Picking right up from the first video onto fence spots, garage lights, fence plug, located in the user function tab. Fence spots, this is where I use the on the exterior page at the bottom where it's red, green, and blue for all on, all off, or all reset. This is part of why that is there. If I click on all on and it becomes true, then this statement would equate to false. So it would skip over this and would come down and say if all on is equal to true, go ahead and take pin 48 and write it high. And pin 48 I know is the fence plugs. I'm sorry, fence spots. If I hit reset, then it sets all on equal to false and all off equal to false. Then this part of the code will run. I'm asking if the current on-off 53 is equal to true, write 48 high. Again, 48 is fence spots. And 53 is the Wemo. So if the USB power supply plugged into the Wemo is on, I'm receiving 5 volts, I'm high, I'm true, go ahead and turn on the lights. But if Wemo's off, sometime after 1 a.m. and before, just before sunset, if the Wemo is off, then I'm going to set the fence spots to low, turning them off. I do the same thing with the gate lights. The difference is here it's 53, here it's 3. And that's because the light that's in the header of the gates coming in from the back or the front have little lights in them so that I can find the keyhole if I come home after 2 o'clock. Point 3 is the condition of a photocell. Just a 110 volt photocell. I didn't get crazy and buy something fancy and try to wire it in and write all kinds of code. It's just a lot easier for me to plug a USB wall wart charger thingy-dingy into the a receptacle that's controlled by the photocell rather than a light. If the photocell is true, turn the lights on. If the photocell otherwise, if it's not true, it must be false, so turn the lights off. And again, those follow the rules for the all on and all off function. Fence plug's a little bit different. When I click, if I want to change how the fence plug operates, I have to be on the admin page, and I press the click here to change how the plug is controlled. Then the drop down pops up and it says, do you want to control the plugs off? Not the plugs, the plug. You want to control it off, control it with the Wemo, control it with the photocell, or control it with the house plugs. And then I send through the HTTP request a different variable that over in the, I'll show you in a minute, in the main or in the void loop part, I set the FP variable to one of these cases, 0 through 3, and then the appropriate action is taken. The garage plug is similar. It's again, I told you I can only control it via the Arduino. As far as I'm concerned, that makes my definition of home automation true. Doesn't have to be true for everything involved here. It only has to be true once, and here it is. This garage plug is 100% only controllable through the Arduino. There's no manual switch. If I mentioned that, I'm sorry, but that is what it is. And again, it works the same way. I click on the drop-down item number to be off, Wemo, photocell, or with the house plugs. The garage plugs and house plugs where I plug in Christmas lights, or if I'm having a party and I want to be able to turn them on and off, or automatic, that's how I do it. Back to void loop. We just talked about those. So then, once these each run and it falls through, the next thing that happens is I go ahead and I set a variable, sent page, to false. I check to see if I have a client trying to check in. If I do, this takes place. If not, It goes down to the bottom of the code and then it ends up right back here and does this again until there's a client. Once there is a client, I grab the request and I character by character. It took me a long time to understand what was going on here because it's kind of a choppy loop. But once you get it, you get it. And so basically I'm collecting the request one character at a time and I'm adding it to the variable HTTP underscore request. Then once the request is complete, which is when the current line is blank, I send this response with a break, and then if it's the first time through, or actually, if it's the first time through, none of these will be true because it's not possible for the HTTP request to have this in it. This request will never be this on the first iteration or when the client first connects. It's not possible. So these all equate to false, one after another, all the way down. All false, 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 false. I get down to here. This last one, the Ajax refresh, is also false. So if everything's false, else, if the sent page is also false, go ahead and send the John version 5 HTML file through the typical send a file from the SD card. The cool thing for me was I went to the Arduino forums and I typed in the question, slow web server, something to that effect. And I found a bright person, not sure if he's young or old, or not even sure if it's a guy or a gal, because shame on me, I didn't save that web page or put it to my reading list or anything. But he explained that the way that the web server sends a page is it will send out the buffer out to the browser. Boom, boom, boom. Whether the buffer is full, all 64 parts of the array are full or not, it doesn't matter. It's sending the array. So what he says is take the web page and read from the web page one byte at a time, add it to the buffer, or add it to this variable called the buffer, and once it's full, it sends out the first 64 characters in one shot. Do that until you reach the end of the page, and so if it's when you get down to here, it's saying if it's less than the count, meaning that the last time you don't have a full buffer, but you have a halfway, three-quarter full buffer, go ahead and send that because you're at the end of the file. Then I turn around, I say that the page has been sent. Then I serial print just because I want to know that the page was sent. That it wasn't a problem on the Arduino why the page isn't showing up, that it's actually, it went through this whole process, the page sent successfully, so I must have a problem with the browser. I hit the refresh button, everything goes away. Then you get back into the ending part of receiving the HTTP request with the null and the carriage return at the end of the line. And if that's all true, it breaks out, stops the client, and resets the request variable, the HTTP request, to 0. So I mentioned in the last part we were talking about fence plug. So if I push the button on the web page that says set the fence plug equal to the Wemo, or set it so that it turns on and off with the Wemo, what really happens is I send in the HTTP request lowercase action capital I. So when the if-thens come down and it finds that the index is greater than -1 for this phrase, let's say, it sets the FP variable, fence plug, equal to 1, or if it's K, J, whatever, it doesn't matter. It sets it to this variable, then the fence plug responds appropriately until that variable gets changed again. In essence, what each of these does is it toggles between, here, let's just stop here. Whatever 38 is, I don't know. The output, off the top of my head, I do not know what output pin 38 controls. but assuming that I receive capital action, capital N, in the request, this will evaluate to true that it's greater than 1. Then I turn around and I say, well, if hidden, which is really the status of the control relay, if the control relay is true, then I want to write, or I want to turn off, I want to write it low so that it will change the state of the light. If that's not true, then I know that it's equal to false, so else false, write it high. And that toggle with one button, the on-off button, it will toggle between the two states. So I don't have to have, on my web page, I don't have to have an on button and an off button. With the single button, I click on it and it will flip to the opposite state. That's what each of these if-thens do, trickling all the way down. So I got a little bit ahead of myself. So once the web page loads into the browser, there are two functions that immediately begin. One is the onload function, which basically sets how the page will display. I currently have it to start displaying the garage page. After all, I did start this whole madness because of the garage door situation. So when I land on the web page, it displays that. The second thing that happens, once that page displays, there's an interval timer that starts, and that sends the HTTP request that is labeled, let's a little bit further down here, right here. It sends this request, AJAX refresh. So the AJAX refresh, when this evaluates to, when it's greater than -1, when it evaluates to true, it's going to run this function, AJAX response client, which is in this tab here. So what I'm sending through the client print line function are all the array values that I spoke of before. We're starting with point 2, on off 2, relay 2, hidden 2. Basically, point 2 is a 2-letter character, 2-letter, single letter, 2-letter, single letter, all the way through. There are some in the back. This is not one of them, but in the back that are for the garage door openers. I'm only sending the on-off point. Actually, that's 6 and 7. That should be at the very end, I think. Nope. I'm sorry. But I only sent, right here's one, 65 and 65. Point 65 is one of the amplifiers. I don't know if it's a basement, bath, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I'm sending the hidden is on-off, meaning monitoring the state whether the amplifier is on or off. I mentioned that I do not control the amplifiers, only because there is a volume control in the room, and in the same switch box is a manual switch to turn the amplifier on and off. I would never want to turn the amplifier on and off remotely, but I do want to know whether it's on or off, and I occasionally check. Rather than run around to all the different rooms where the switches are with the volume controls, I simply open up the web browser and see which amplifiers are on or off. You know, when you're having a house full of people, you sometimes forget to turn stuff off, and that's that. So it's a pretty straightforward, well, it's a lot of if-then statements. I ran the code earlier. It's 38,000 bytes long, bytes. I always get those two mixed up. And I have 256 available to me, so I'm way low. Initially I was concerned that this code was going to get long. I had nothing to base that on. I just thought it was going to be too much. I knew it was going to be big, but it's way smaller than I thought. So I do have room to grow. Pretty happy about that. The next video I do and the next post will be on the HTML portion of of how this all fits together. But at least these are the two sketches. The output sketch, which we just finished the second half, and the first video was the input. I hope you found it helpful. Comment. I will gladly post specific answers to specific questions for you. Thanks a lot for watching, guys and gals.